For the past few weeks, I've been thinking a lot about Brother Wilson and telling Brother Wilson's stories. A retired Methodist preacher who in his 80s started a church and continued to preach when anybody would listen to him. A man who was genuinely pious. I can't say that about very many people. Was very progressive. In those days, we're talking in the 1950s in Alabama, challenged any system or any person that he thought violated the love of God. And that included in those days segregation. A man that, even though I never knew him personally that close, meant an awful lot to my life. And I don't have the time to tell all the stories, but there's some that just pop up every once in a while. I was a campus pastor at Auburn, and I remember Billy Graham came to Auburn, to the stadium. They had him on a platform out in the middle of the stadium. And the stadium was packed with people who'd come to hear him preach. And Brother Wilson, just as it was getting started, I looked down on the field, and here's Brother Wilson. He's got his little lawn chair and had on that white hat that was his trademark. And he's walking out on the field. He was hard of hearing. And when a couple of the ushers tried to stop him, he said, "You can't stop me. I came to hear the preacher." And he just walked right on out to about 10 to 15 feet from the platform, unfolded his little lawn chair, and sat there with his hand behind his ear, listening to Billy Graham. Brother Wilson pretty much went where he wanted to. If he was on the Lord's business, he went. Not too many people tried to stop him. I've told some of the stories. I've got many more to tell. But when my parents were getting elderly and still living at home, but not too long before that changed, my wife and I went home and we took Mother and Dad out for supper. And both of them loved catfish. And this is near Montgomery, Alabama. And we went to Claude Ezel's Catfish Country restaurant. And oh man, was it good. And we had just ordered, and just had gotten our order, and we were beginning to dig into those delicious catfish. And the waitress heard us talking, and she said, I don't know how what was in our conversation, but she said to me, she said, "Are you a preacher?" And I said, "Yep." And she said, "Well, it's good to have you here." And I said, "Well, thank you. It's good to be here." And a little bit later, Claude came over. Claude Ezel was a big man. Had an apron, stained apron with all the grease on it and everything else. And he said, "I'm Claude Ezel." He said, "This is my place, and I understand that you're a preacher. What kind of preacher are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Methodist preacher, also a United Church of Christ, but when I lived here, for the most part, I was a Methodist." He said, "A Methodist preacher?" He said, "Did you ever know Brother Hugh Wilson?" And I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "In fact, we were just talking about him." He said, "Well, I got a story to tell you about him." He said, "I'm a hard-shell Baptist, always have been. But I can remember years ago, my little girl, she was about 3 or 4, I guess, at the time. And she contracted pneumonia. Now, you may not think that's so terrible these days, but in those days that was a death sentence. And we didn't think she had long to live. Now, Brother Wilson is not my preacher. As I said, I'm a hard-shell Baptist. But Brother Wilson knew about it. And we were staying up late one night, staying up with her. Actually, we thought that was the night she was going to die. And we would sit there and talking with each other, and then things got really quiet. And he said, "You know, I just felt a presence. I couldn't define it. I just felt something change." And so I got up and opened the door and went out on the porch. This must have been 12 or 1 o'clock. And I opened the door, and there was Brother Wilson, right under the window, praying. He wasn't my pastor. He didn't want to intrude, but he was praying for my little girl. He said, I was a Baptist then, and I still am, though people around here don't think I'm a very good one. But I got to tell you, there's one man who walked with God, and I give him credit for being the channel of God's healing love that saved my little girl. And she's still alive. She's a grandmother now. She was too young at the time, of course, to know what was happening. But she's heard that story over and over again. And I gotta tell you, I hope you're half the man that Brother Wilson was. And I said, and I do too. Brother Wilson was a young man when that story happened. Brother Wilson was always a young man. He was a young man at 87. And I can remember him saying at one occasion that when your yesterdays are brighter than your tomorrows, then you know you're old. And once in a while, when I tell that story, somebody will say, you know, they just don't make them like that anymore. I know what they're saying. They are inspired by the spirit of Brother Hugh Wilson, just like I was. But you know, that's not true. They do make them like that. And every once in a while, and if I had the time, I could tell you stories about other people that I've met. Men and women, young and old. I'm thinking of a young preacher in his 30s right now who is challenging what I think is an immoral and unjust law. Speaking out in the middle of a congregation at some risk. I know of a man who's in his late 60s, early 70s, who is still going strong, a little more conservative than I am. But he's speaking out and working for justice. People of all ages. So Brother Wilson is inspiring. He inspired me, and I hope you resonate with some of what I'm talking about. But they do make them like that. And every age, I think, has people who understand and who combine compassion with a sense of moral justice. And that's what keeps me going. It's my privilege to tell those stories. And I hope they mean something to you.